Hello and welcome to Homeschool Moms Unfiltered. I am your host, Megan, and with me is my fabulous co host.
Hi, I'm Amanda.
Welcome. We are your messy, imperfect homeschool mom friends, and we are here to keep it real. If you are looking for a genuine homeschool community that values inclusivity, where women's rights and trans rights are non negotiable, love is love, Black Lives Matter, no human is illegal, you have found your people. Like, follow, subscribe, whatever the thing is on the platform that you're on right now where you're receiving this content, do that thing, right? Do that thing so that you get more Homeschool Moms Unfiltered and we can connect because we are so glad you're here.
Yes, for sure. So, if you're new to the podcast, this is our weekly book club episode. So, every week we have two episodes, a regular podcast episode and a book club episode. Fun fact, Megan and I met in a virtual book club for homeschool moms. So, book club is something that we value tremendously. It forces us personally to read books that might otherwise sit on our bookshelves for, ages, while we instead endlessly indulge in smut and historical fiction, respectively. So, we've both grown as parents, women, homeschool moms, and more as the result of our book club adventures, both here and in other book clubs that we've done together.
So true. So we release a book club episode every Thursday. And if you're thinking, well, shoot, I haven't read the book, so let me retreat now before I'm in too deep. No, don't go. Don't go anywhere. You don't even have to read the book to be a part of this book club. We show up and chat about the book every week. You're welcome to read along with us. That's awesome. We will link the book in our show notes and our description below. You can join our Facebook group and ask us for it. We'd be happy to share the book details with you. Or you can just tune in for our Sparks Note style discussion of this week's content. Or you can even decide at the end of the book to go ahead and treat yourself and read it if listening to us for a few weeks has gotten you hooked enough. So truly, whatever works for you works for us. We don't judge here.
Absolutely. So this week, this month, actually, we are currently reading The New Menopause by Marie Claire Haver. I'm not sure. If you're just joining us, I'm terrible with names, but she is a doctor, MD. According to the demographic information Spotify gives us, the vast majority of our listeners, I was just looking at it actually right before we started recording, over 60% of our listeners are hovering right around the perimenopause, menopause age. So here we are, all trying to homeschool our kids while going through this, we'll put it nicely and say epic change. Some might say shitstorm. In many cases, our kids are also riding a hormonal roller coaster right along with us, right? So good times. We're all having a lot of fun. So how do we take care of ourselves while juggling it all? We're actually going to do a regular podcast episode about just that. But this specific episode is book club. And this week we're discussing chapters 6 to 8. So let's dive in.
That we are. So chapter 6 is called What is Happening to Your Body During Menopause. This chapter seemed kind of like what you would expect from a health class or a sex ed textbook for teens. As I explained last week, I never had any of those classes as a teen, and I've kind of been piecing together information as an adult about my body and how it works. So I really appreciated this complete guide. It talks about the function of your ovaries, the phases of the menstrual cycle, stuff like that.
Yeah. So I mentioned before that we have secondary infertility. I've talked about infertility. We tried for another child for several years. We tried all the things. We did the IUIs with various protocols and then gave IVF a go. And given my personality type, I learned so much about my body and the reproductive cycle and just all of the things related to fertility, right, during that time. So yeah, I have all of 3 sticky notes in chapter 6.
You already knew all the things, and I knew none of the things. So here I am to learn them at the age of 43.
It is never too late to learn.
That's it. I'm here for it. I said last week, I'm probably going to come across as like not the smartest with this book, where typically we're talking about things that are kind of in my wheelhouse. And this one is definitely not. So, and I'm okay with that. You can't know everything about everything. So that's why we read the books. So page 70 was my first note. And Amanda mentioned last week that menopause and hormone replacement therapy and things like that are kind of having a moment if you scroll through social media and stuff like that. Even I went to Target yesterday and there was, oh my goodness, and I was like, commit this to memory. I have to share it in the podcast. It was some sort of gummy related to like luteinizing hormone or something. I forget exactly what it was, but I was like, that doesn't seem very trustworthy. So it seems like everybody is trying to sell you a product or a solution or whatever. So I liked here that the author notated that there are two terms, estrogen dominance and hormone imbalance. And she said both of these are not medically recognized terms. And so I thought that that was a really great thing because I thought, okay, if you start seeing that in ads and stuff like that, it should be like, ding, ding, ding. This is not a valid resource. This is not something that we should probably trust if those two terms are there. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then on 71, she begins a lengthy conversation about the health risks associated with menopause. And we talked a lot about those last week about heart disease and osteoporosis and things like that. But there's a really big breakout of them here. So if you're interested in digging into those even more than we talked about last week, the book is like a really nice, meaty resource for that.
Yeah, for sure. And that's kind of what my notes were very specific things that I kind of pulled out of this section. So my first note was on page 72. She has a quote that says, quote, research published in the Journal of Internal Medicine found that 1 in 3 adults aged 65 and over dies within 12 months of suffering a hip fracture. So I knew that hip fractures in the elderly were not good, but I did not know the stats were that bad. Like, I don't really consider 65 the elderly.
No.
And 1 in 3 don't make it after a hip fracture. Holy smokes.
That's pretty intense.
Right? I was like, wow, okay. So then on page 73, she's still talking about osteoporosis and she highlights some key risk factors like petite body frame, which means you weigh 125 pounds or less, early menopause, history of smoking or heavy drinking, and certain chronic conditions and medications. One of which is corticosteroids, which I do definitely take on a daily basis and sometimes more often than that. And then she goes on to talk about a bone density scan called a DEXA scan. Most insurance companies will cover this starting at age 65. But if you've been following along, you know that 65 is past the ideal time to start menopausal hormone therapy. So sometimes you can get it approved early if you have those risk factors that I just ran through. If not, it costs between $200 and $300 out of pocket, at least last year when this book was being published. And she really recommends actually getting that done. And that seems like first off, it's annoying that insurance isn't going to cover it when it's actually useful, but that's that thing, right? If you want to try to protect yourself against osteoporosis, you definitely need to be starting the treatments before the age of 65. So keep that in mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I somehow missed that. So I told Amanda I read this a couple of days ago in preparation for our episode, and I was exhausted, like positively exhausted while I was reading, and I missed that hip fracture thing. So I'm so glad you brought that up because somehow I missed that stat when I was reading. So, or it didn't sink in enough at the moment. So, yeah, that is a lot. That's intense. Yeah. All right. So my next note is on 75. And really, it was just that one of the themes of this section, when she keeps going through all this stuff, is that there are really not very effective screening tools in place for XYZ, right? She brings up all these different things and she's like, but we can't screen for that, or we can't tell if you have it, or it's hard to tell. We can't screen for it. And I just don't really have anything enlightening to say except right? Oh, that's frustrating. Right. So there's a ton of unknowns and guesswork apparently involved in this since they can't actually definitively screen for a bunch of this stuff.
Yep. Super annoying.
Yeah.
Well, my next note was just on page 76 and it's kind of along those lines, but also so throughout the book, actually, in a lot of ways, but at this particular point, she had been talking about it a good amount. She's talking about cholesterol. And I do want to take just a moment because I feel like this is one of those examples where she's making some really big claims about something that is in large part outside of her area of specialty. Cholesterol is far more complicated and nuanced than most doctors admit. And in fairness, maybe it's along the same lines of menopause, and they're not actually taught the nuanced parts of cholesterol. Just, oh, high cholesterol, make sure you medicate them, because everyone with high cholesterol has heart attacks, and it's like, it's not that simple. So, do some peer-reviewed medical research on it if high cholesterol is something that impacts you. There's some really interesting, and even if you don't find it interesting, significant things to know about high cholesterol. I'll just leave it at that. I'll get off my soapbox, but it came up and I was like, nah. There you go.
Like, you're not trusting this from you just at this moment. Okay. Yeah. So that was chapter 6. I mean, it was chock full of good information. It's something that you either probably, like Amanda, you probably already knew most of it. It was just kind of a refresher, or it's something where you're digging in like textbook style to actually learn the information from scratch, but it was solid information, cholesterol notwithstanding, a pretty good section. So if you're at all keen to read it, I mean, there's literally diagrams of ovaries there. And I was looking at it going like, oh, okay. I mean, this is information that I did not receive throughout my education. So I'm always keen to learn a little bit more. Okay, so then we are in chapter 7, which is called Everything You Wanted to Know About Hormone Therapy, and maybe things you didn't want to know about hormone therapy. You never know. But there was a definition on page 88 that I thought was really cool. It's in this section called Hormones 101. I'm here for that. Do you ever watch like The Tonight Show or any of those where they do like roving street reporter type things, and they go out on the street and they ask people something like, I have the feeling if you stopped how many people on the street and said, what are hormones? People would be like, those things that go wacky when you're pregnant or you have your period. But could anybody really tell you, somebody who's not in the medical field, like what a hormone is? Probably not that many. So I liked this definition. She said very simply, hormones are chemical messengers that tell your cells what to do. And I was like, oh, I can get on board with that. That makes sense. Thank you for sharing. So I liked that one. And then she goes on the next page to break down 3 different types of estrogens, which I didn't know that there were 3 different types of estrogens, because you always just hear about estrogen, singular. And so she talks about estradiol, which is the primary estrogen secreted by the ovaries during reproductive or premenopausal phase of life. And then after menopause, production of estradiol almost completely disappears, which makes sense. That's why people are replacing it with hormone replacement therapy. She's got estriol, which is produced by a developing placenta during pregnancy and is mostly undetectable in non-pregnant individuals, which is interesting. And then estrone is considered the weakest of the estrogens. Poor estrone, that's so harsh, and is produced mostly in small amounts by the ovaries. But I didn't know that there were 3. So I appreciate the level of detail that is in this book.
Yeah, that's it. You can't accuse her of not giving a lot of detail.
Right. Yeah. It's all there. It's almost like, for me, because I didn't have a lot of this, it's a little bit like drinking from a fire hose, where I'm just like, like holy macaroni, but it is helpful. And then on the next page, she has some acronyms that we've been hearing a lot about, or that you're seeing a lot in the book, where she talks about defining hormone replacement therapy. You may have noticed that hormone therapy goes by a lot of names. Some experts use the term hormone therapy, also HT as the acronym, and it used to be referred to as hormone replacement therapy, HRT, which is interesting because I hear HRT more than I hear hormone therapy. So I find that super interesting. Yeah. And then she says she prefers to use the term menopausal hormone therapy, MHT, as a broad term to describe the use of hormone replacement during perimenopause and postmenopause. So I thought that was kind of helpful to understand. Do you ever see sometimes where there's terms and you're like, well, are these the same thing? You're just using different terms to describe the same thing, or did they describe different things? And if they describe different things, what's the difference between them? So it was like kind of just level setting on what these terms are that we hear get thrown around a little bit. And then she dives into benefits versus risk ratio, which I thought was really good. She says, ideally, your doctor will consider you as an individual and ask, what? Did I do that out loud? What are the risks of estrogen use for my patient? And what are the strategies for risk reduction? That's not just like everybody gets the same thing who walks into the office. It's kind of like if you walk into urgent care with any sort of whatever you're leaving with a Z-Pack, like that concept. It's like, let's hope that's not happening when it comes to menopause and hormone therapy.
You get a Z-Pack. You get a Z-Pack. Yeah. All right. So then my next note was on page 92. So the heading is called When to Consider Replacing Your Hormones. And I'm just going to go ahead and read this paragraph because it addressed something that I brought up in the last episode. And I was like, oh, here we go. So if you are symptomatic, you can begin hormone replacement therapy anywhere in your menopausal journey, and the earlier the better. Yes, this means that you can begin using hormone therapy in perimenopause, and you can experience the benefits of menopausal hormone therapy before your periods stop. During perimenopause, fluctuating levels of estrogen and progesterone can often lead to hot flashes, night sweats, mood swings, and irregular menstrual cycles. And hormone therapy is highly effective at reducing these symptoms and improving quality of life. This is why, for my patients, I recommend MHT as long as the benefits outweigh the risks for the individual as soon as any symptoms present, and that includes perimenopause. So I had said before, like, she keeps talking about menopause and menopause. Like, does that include perimenopause? Because I feel like perimenopause and menopause are two quite different things. And a lot of women have perimenopause symptoms for a long time. I mean, you can have them for years and years. So I was glad that she finally specifically said, yes, this is your menopause journey, including perimenopause, even though people like to pretend like it doesn't exist and plenty of doctors pretend like it doesn't exist. Yeah. So I liked that.
Mm-hmm. P.S. You were looking at your book and I muted myself because I started choking on a tickle on my throat. And it was like one of those scenes out of like a comedy sketch where you were sitting there, like just graciously reading out of your book. And I was over here like ready to like keel over on the floor. But I'm good. I got a drink now. So carry on.
Well, first off, are you okay? And second off, out of the corner of my eye, I could see you moving. And I was like, either something has gone terribly wrong with my recording and she can't hear me or something else. I'm going to have to redo this whole paragraph, or something crazy is happening with the dog or the kids or something. Like,
no, I'm just keeling over and dying. It's all good.
But don't worry, you could have used hormone replacement therapy to drastically reduce your risks of mortality.
So, glass of water in hand. Carry on.
Oh, man. All right. So let's see. I had the next comment as well on page 94. So she takes a pretty strong stance against compounded bioidentical hormone therapy because they have to be prepared in a compounding pharmacy and there's a lot less oversight. I'm of two minds on this, right? I get a daily medication from a compounding pharmacy. And the author later admits that she does too, actually. So I guess the bottom line is be aware, be cautious. Don't go with a sketchy compounding pharmacy. I'm not entirely sure, but also no, compounding pharmacies aren't all bad, right? They definitely have a place. And yeah. I was just surprised at how much she said, do not do this. And then she's like, and I get one of my medications from a compounding pharmacy. And I was like, what? I'm a little confused. So let's see. Then on page 95, I have a quote here. She says, the other thing about compounding pharmacies is that they present a sales opportunity for promoters of unreliable hormone testing practices. Yeah, okay, I can totally see that. There are practitioners out there who will promote the use of saliva or urine-based testing, namely the Dutch urine test, which costs hundreds of dollars out of pocket, to help them promote customized prescriptions for hormone therapy. Yet the hormone tests they're using aren't accurate or effective as a means of determining the most effective dosage for a patient. This is basically because your hormone levels change day to day and can vary widely during the menopausal transition. There's simply no way to pin the right dose on the moving target that is your hormones during this time of your life. So bottom line, we're all desperate for answers. There are people out there that are going to promise they have a saliva test or a urine-based test. I've seen home tests now that they're saying you can you can do at home,
Mhm.
something as easy as pee on a stick and you'll know. And she's just saying, like, look, as much as we all want easy answers, there's no such thing as an easy answer, because if you're in perimenopause, you know that your hormones are all over the place.
Mhm.
And, a test one day may not give the same results as the test the next day. Like, if you're living it with us, you know this already, even if you want an easy answer, which I'm pretty sure we all want an easy answer, but there just aren't any, it seems.
Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, that's one of those,
Yeah.
like, there are very few diagnostic options to determine this, like we talked about earlier, right? It's like everything
Mm-hmm.
else. It's like, we can't really
Yep.
tell you definitively one way or the other what's happening. Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
Exactly. So I had like a stretch of all of the notes there for a minute. My last one is in this stretch. Come on, we should know me better than that. It's not my last one. My last one in this stretch is on page 99. And it was the first time that she specifically addresses menopausal hormone therapy for women who have had breast cancer. And then she goes into more detail on page 111, where she talks specifically about after cancer treatment or if you are a BRCA carrier. And
Mhm.
so I just thought that those were really important. I have several friends who fall in that category. And so I kind of been waiting to see if she was going to address it. It is addressed in here if you're interested.
Nice. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And then I've got the next note, which is on 101, where she talks about testosterone. So I found this super interesting. She says, in an ideal world, there would be an FDA approved testosterone option for women that doses this hormone in female appropriate amounts. That's available, is easy to prescribe, and is covered by insurance. But, well, that ideal world doesn't exist just yet. And so she says many practitioners, herself included, are prescribing the off label use of testosterone for some of our menopausal patients, which I knew testosterone had been prescribed. I didn't realize that it was off label. So part of me, my kind of not terribly informed about this particular topic, right, is thinking, is it because it's off label because it's never been tested and the efficacy has never been proven for women? Because why would we test on women? That just makes no sense, right? Or what is the reason, right? Like, why are we there? So I didn't realize that it's being prescribed off label, which I thought was interesting, because she talks about pellets, for example, a few pages back in the non-FDA approved options category. And so I thought it's interesting that some things are being used off label or without the full research and testing being done, and then other things are not. Okay. So I was just
Yeah.
curious. It's like, that's something that, like, a little more digging.
Yeah. I can't say for sure about testosterone, but I know that a couple of my medications are off label. Actually, all of my daily medications are off label.
You're a
Now that I
special
really
case.
think about it. Yeah. But so, it's one of those cases. And I really, especially the first time my doctor was like, I'd like you to think about this. And I was like, no, we don't do that. Like, and then she gave me like a study from Stanford and another study that had been done from somewhere else. And it was that thing, like, universities had studied it, but the pharmaceutical companies hadn't
Right.
been bothered to put like all of their weight behind it. And unless a pharmaceutical company is doing it and shepherding it through the process, it doesn't get done. And a lot of times, if it's not a new medication or it's not an expensive medication, pharmaceutical companies don't put the time and effort into getting it approved for that use because it doesn't earn them enough money to like make it worth it to them.
Mm-hmm.
Never mind the fact that we end up paying a fortune for it. Like, it's supposed to be a cheap medication, but since it's off label, you can't have it for cheap. Ha 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 ha. So that was actually my next comment. Like, in that same section, she says, given that testosterone has been shown to improve sexual functioning, muscle tone and mass, fatigue, and bone health in menopausal women, we can hope that one day there will be an FDA approved version. And I'm just like, men need help with improving sexual function. No problem. Here's medication. It's super easy to get, basically free. Women need help improving sexual function. Well, let's just make them the butt of every not in the mood joke we can come up with,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, oh, it's all psychological and in their head. And why would we ever, like, but yeah, men, like, got to make sure that they, like, I could go on and on about medical care and the patriarchy, but we'd be here all week. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, 100%, right? Okay. So speaking of societal components that are broken, on page 105, she talks about the fact that there are numerous FDA approved MHT options available. So if you're only being offered one, that's a little bit of a red flag. Let's call it like a magenta flag, shall we? Does this doctor have a financial incentive to push just that one option? That ideally you should be presented with multiple options and given pros and cons of each, and maybe literature on each or data on each. So if you're only getting one, why? What is that doctor's stake in just pushing that one particular thing? So just something to kind of scratch away at and ask some more questions.
Yeah, I have to say that I did not know all of the different types of all of the different things. And we don't really go into it in this discussion of book club, because if you're interested in doing this, you really need to get the book and like read all of the different types that are available and the options so that you like really know. That we can't go over all of that for you. We'll be here for like 4 hours and no one wants to listen to that book club. But I was surprised to learn. I kind of always thought hormone therapy was like creams or gels that you put on, and there are those kinds, but there's also the patches, which I had only seen those from like Instagram advertising companies. I didn't realize there were actually like FDA approved ones.
Legitimate medical options. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I used the patch for birth control, like way back then. And they also have a vaginal ring. And I used that type of birth control as well. I was on birth control for a while. It did not affect my first fertility. So don't come at me with that. But like there are those things. And then she talks about oral. And a lot of times oral is not the way you want to go because it increases your risk factor for a lot of other things. And there's just a lot around that whole discussion that I didn't know. And like you were mentioning the pellets, they're these like tablets that they inject under your skin and they dissolve. She's talking about how much people, I was like, no, thank you. Like hard pass. I don't know about like, okay, nope. But yeah, so many options.
Yeah. I have a friend whose husband works in women's health, like gynecological, whatever. He's in pharmaceuticals, but that's his field. And they're all about the pellets right now. Like there's a ton of pellet stuff going on because I was talking to her one day about various like perimenopause symptoms. And she was like, you should try the pellets. And she was like, I've been considering the pellets. And then when I read in here that they're not, I mean, I never even got to the point of like, anywhere close to doing it. If I had, I'm sure I would have realized. But then when I read in here that they're not FDA approved, I was like, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And not FDA approved for women for good reason based on what is written in the book.
Right.
So yeah, there's that difference between like, do they have good research studies behind them and they're not FDA approved, or are they not well researched and not FDA approved? Or well researched and most doctors like, I don't think so. You don't have the right body parts for that to be a good option.
Exactly.
Because that's what a lot of it comes down to.
Yeah. So we both have comments on 107 under the frustrating facts on MHT costs. I think your comment comes before mine.
Yeah, I think just a little. So there's a discussion on page 107 about the cost of medication in the United States and how you'll have to do some shopping around to find the best price. And how at the end of the day, ultimately, some of it might be out of pocket. If you're new to this kind of thing, I just want to give like a personal anecdote, right? That I have a couple of medications like this. I was just saying earlier, pretty much all of my daily medications are off label. For that, I did that shopping around. She talks about going to your regular pharmacy and then talking with your doctor about other pharmacy options. Because my medications are off label, technically my insurance won't cover them because they've been prescribed by my specialists to be used in not the way that they're FDA approved. I will never understand how in the United States your medical professional can say you need this medication and your insurance can say, well, that's nice, but we won't pay for it. But that's where we're at. So I found that I could run them through my insurance at my regular pharmacy and pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month. Or I can use specialty compounding pharmacies and mail order pharmacies to pay out of pocket for a fraction of the price. Now, do not just pick a random mail order pharmacy or like the cheapest compounding pharmacy you can find. Like you can find all kinds of crazy things, but if your doctor is prescribing something that's off label, I have found that they always know that there might be a problem with insurance coverage in the United States, and they always have suggestions. From the compounding pharmacy, my doctor was like, hey, you might want to get quotes from these compounding pharmacies and see which one would be best. These are the two that I recommend. And when my cardiologist prescribed something that was off label, he was like, hey, check with your insurance. And if it comes back at $816 a month, like I think it's going to, use these mail order pharmacies, like get quotes from these ones and go with whichever one you're comfortable with, right? They're not going to just be like, yo, I expect you to spend $1,000 a month on prescriptions because the insurance industry in the United States is crap. So yeah, ask your doctor.
Very helpful. I just love the fact that she ends this section with the best call out ever. It says, I wish that we could just pick up all we needed from our local pharmacy using insurance and all pay the same reasonable costs, but the system is truly broken. True. Okay. And we're reading, this is what, less than a month after the United Healthcare CEO situation unaliving. Yes, exactly. Right. So yeah, we're in these times, right? If you're not in the US, you're sitting there thinking like, what a dystopian world they live in. True story. And then in parentheses, she calls out and says, except for when it comes to generic Viagra, which you can get for pennies a day whenever you get it. So I'm like, I love this woman. She's amazing. Yeah. So I enjoyed that little call out there.
It's true. It is so easy to get Viagra.
So aggravating. All right. So we're about to dive into chapter 8. But first, we want to let you know, if you'd ever want to join us for a book club episode, you totally can. You can come and chat with us. You can join us on screen. You can share your thoughts and feelings with our audience. We always love making new book club friends. If you head over to our website, homeschoolmomsunfiltered.com, there's a link at the top that says book club. You can send us a 1 to 2 minute video letting us know why you'd like to join us for book club, which book you'd like to do with us. Our next book is Soul School by Amber O'Neill Johnston. I'm so excited for that book. It's brand new. It's just coming out. And then we'll be reading Differently Wired, which is a reread for the two of us. It's written by Deborah Reber. It's an amazing book, all about neurodivergence, twice exceptional kids. So if you'd like to join us for a chat, send us a message. We would love to welcome you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. So chapter 8 is called Preparing for Your Appointment. I thought there was some good stuff in this chapter. You've got the first note, Amanda. What do you have?
Yeah, so she starts with things like how to find a menopause specialist and how to check insurance coverage. For the most part, I think Americans have had to jump through these hoops before for something, right? Like I'm going to be pretty shocked if you've made it to perimenopause and you haven't had to figure these things out. But if you need pointers, it's here in chapter 8.
I think I might have shared it before. I literally got to the point of finding the email address for the CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield South Carolina and sending him an email about the fact that he was guilty of medical neglect in order to get my kids' medication covered, because they had made $8.2 billion the previous year, but wouldn't cover his $400 a month meds. So yeah, I think we've all figured out how this criminal entity works and how to navigate it.
Yeah, exactly. And understand the importance of making sure that you're in network or that it's covered and all of that jazz, right? Because those can be really crazy bills if you're not. Mm-hmm. So my next note was on page 120. It's a quote. It says, when researchers from Yale University looked at over 500,000 insurance claims from women in various stages of menopause, they found that 300,000 of the claims were related to patients seeking medical assistance for significant menopausal symptoms, and that 75% of the patients left without treatment. And I was just like, I wish I could say I was surprised, but I'm not. I don't know a single friend who has gotten anywhere with their regular doctor. And I have a good friend who has just started this process. And the first person who was supposed to be a great menopause specialist was not good. It was like a referral that she knew was in work, and a friend or colleague or someone was like, oh, you should go see this person, and she tried and she was like, it was so bad. And I'm like, I told you, you got to go to this website, like Google it, make sure that you go through that actual website, because it is hard to find someone who actually knows what they're talking about. And honestly, I want to know what secret the 25% who got treatment had. Like, what did you know that the rest of us don't? Because yeah.
Yeah, we should invite those people on. If you're part of the 25% and you happen to be listening, come tell us.
Exactly.
So she gives us some tips about making an appointment, which I thought were great. She talks about getting an early appointment. It makes sense. Doctors are people too. By the end of the day, or as the day wears on, they're more burnt out, they're more frazzled, they're more stressed. So she talks about getting an early appointment so that you get somebody who's fresh and ready to go for the day. So I thought that was pretty good. And then she said, when you make the appointment, tell the office staff what your purpose of this appointment is. Like, don't show up for like a basic well check or something thinking that you're going to have this deep discussion about your menopausal symptoms. Let them know that you might need a little bit of extra time. Whether or not they'll actually allocate that extra time, who knows, but you can at least give it a try.
Yeah, man, I do not miss those days. I use, because I have so many medical problems, I use a concierge doctor service, which is not as expensive as it sounds. There are definitely expensive versions. I definitely saw and looked into some very expensive versions, and then I found a much more affordable one. But my minimum appointment is a 30-minute appointment, and I can book longer than that if I need it. I always need a longer appointment because, like I said, I have a lot of specialists and it's really complicated. I cannot imagine trying to sort through some new something like, hey, let's go over all of my symptoms and all of my medical history and all of this and talk about all of our options in 10 to 15 minutes when you're running late and I need to get going. And yeah.
Ugh. Exactly. Yeah. Ugh. And that's, I think, what most people experience. I think if you do have an appointment, to be succinct and to really be fact-based and really lay out your case. On 122, she talks about keeping a symptom journal, which I'm a huge fan of this. One of my kids has some food allergies, and until we could kind of pinpoint exactly what was going on, it was super helpful to be able to write down exactly what he ate, what he drank, bathroom stuff, like all of that, and keep it all organized. So I'm a huge fan of a symptom journal. It's better than going in and just being like, sometimes my stomach hurts, and they're like, what the heck am I supposed to do with that? Right. It's like they need a little bit more to work off of. So, and then on 123, she's got a list of questions here that I thought were awesome to be able, like, if you are looking for a new practitioner to be able to screen, she's got things here like, can you share your experience in training prescribing MHT? How familiar are you with the latest research and guidelines? I don't really love that one, like just the wording of it, because somebody's going to be like, very familiar. I read the stuff. You know what I mean? Like I feel like you want like a little bit of you need to like crack that can open a little bit wider to really get in there. Have you successfully treated patients with symptoms similar to mine using MHT? Can you provide specific examples? Love that. How do you stay updated on advancements and new studies in the field of menopause and hormone therapy? So I feel like that's a better question about the studies and stuff, because then you're really going to get, if they sit there and they're like, well, I read things that come into my email, you're going to be like, next.
I have to recertify every 4 years. Yeah, but not on that. Like, that's not included at all. Thank you very much.
Yeah, exactly. Like, not helpful. Next. Are you open to discussing and considering alternative or complementary therapies alongside MHT to optimize my treatment plan? How do you approach managing potential side effects of MHT, and what steps do you take to minimize associated risks? Are you open to exploring different forms of MHT based on patient preference? And how do you tailor treatment plans to individual lifestyles? Which I think that last one is great, because if they just have like one thing, like the Z-Pack solution, right? Like everybody gets a Z-Pack, then, you're going to find out that answer right there from that question when they stumble all over themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And that was actually my exact note. Like, read this list out loud for anyone who isn't planning to pick up the book. So
yeah,
there we go.
Great questions. And you can tweak those questions, I feel like, to any other medical thing that you're doing too, and just kind of use those same style of questions, but apply it to other conditions, specialists, etc. It was just a good list in general.
Yep, for sure. Mm-hmm. All right. So on 127, there's the green scale questionnaire, which is a symptom checker that you go through and you score 0, 1, 2, or 3 for all of these different symptoms. And then it says teen, a score of 15 or more means estrogen deficiency is likely. And in her practice, they start discussing hormone therapy immediately. And a score of 20 to 25 is common in symptomatic women. And with treatment, they can usually get below a 10. So I thought it was pretty interesting. Did you do it?
I did it. Yeah, I did. So I had one that was like, oh, I don't know how to answer this one. So if I answer that one way, I was a 17. If I answer it another way, I was a 14. So either way, I'm like in the mix there. Oh, and then I had one. So this is just me being
hard.
It's just me
it was
being
really hard.
Yeah, I mean, it's just me being indecisive, right? Like it has anxiety. And I'm like, yeah, but like I'm an anxious fucking wreck. Like I've been an anxious wreck since I was prepubescent. That's not, you know what I mean? But I don't think it's gotten any worse. So, you know what I mean? So it was like stuff like that. Sometimes like I put like 2 to 3 because I wasn't sure, you know, so like certain ones were like more challenging than others when it came to that. So
yeah.
How about you? Did you do it?
Yeah, I did. And I found the same kind of thing. So, like, if I did it based purely on how I feel right now, my score's somewhere between 14 and 18. But if I take out all of my chronic illnesses that I was diagnosed with before the age of 30 and only score it on like current things that have happened or things that are not related to chronic illnesses, I'm only a 7. So I'm like, well, what's the, like I'm only a 7 and we already talked about, like, I've already missed a couple of periods. I'm not at menopause yet, but I'm definitely perimenopausal. So
yeah.
Interesting.
Right. Yeah. It's super interesting. So I always struggle with that. I put way too much time and energy every time I do one of these things into over analyzing the whole thing. Like I'm getting ready to push the nuclear code buttons or something, you know, and I'm like, so that I just worked myself up into a tizzy there. So, but she does go then. Okay. So then the next thing she does on 128 is she goes into red flags from practitioners, which I thought was good. Right. Like, sorry, it's just that time of your life. Like you're being blown off. Okay. Next. Right. I don't prescribe MHT, or I'll only prescribe it for a specific time frame. Some of these like thought processes that are out of dated or dismissive. And so I thought that's good because, you know, sometimes you leave an appointment like that and you're like, is it me? Am I being high maintenance? Am I being difficult? Am I being overly whatever? So it's nice to have it there and be like, no, you deserve better.
Right? Yeah. Right. It sucks that it needs to be in a book for us to feel like
and trust ourselves.
Yeah, no, I went in there with reasonable expectations and I got completely blown off or dismissed. Like, yep. So page 129 starts several pages of tests she recommends requesting at your annual exam as your hormones change. So she's just talking about like these are especially important as you start going through perimenopause and then into your postmenopausal lives, just because these things will change and you want to keep an eye on them. I know for me personally, a lot of them I have done, but not all, and definitely not all of the add-ons she says to consider asking for, making a note that in the United States, you'll likely have to be paying out of pocket for some of that to get it, right? So yay, once again, so great. And my last note, this is like, I feel kind of bad about ending book club this week on this note. It feels kind of catty. I didn't mean for it to be catty, but there's like, the book has been really well written and really well done. And there's this kind of like crazy set of typos in this one little section. And again, it's on cholesterol. So she's talking more about cholesterol and doing a lipid panel. And I said my piece on all of this earlier, right? But in here, she's talking about doing your HDL to triglycerides ratio, right? So that's the good cholesterol versus triglycerides, and you divide them. And then, so it says 2.0 or less is ideal, 4.0 to 6.0 is good. And then it says, quote, over 6.0 or above is bad. And so I'm like, okay, so first off, don't worry if you're between 2 and 4, because you don't even exist, right? You're like, you're golden, you don't exist. And then also the last time I checked, over 6.0 and or above. I mean, the same thing.
Yeah.
I was like, it's just like this one little chunk that, like, man, when they were editing that, like, that got all kinds of wonky. And I know because I did it myself, right? I ran the numbers and I was in that between 2 and 4 range. And so I went back and I reread it like 3 times trying to figure out what I was missing.
Like, where am I in this chart?
Yeah. Like, wait, I don't like, what? Like, what? And then, yeah. And then I realized the like 6.0, I'm like, wow, the whole thing that's just well, if you did your number and you were like 1.5, I'm sure you'd just be like, oh,
moving on. I'm great. Yeah.
No typos in this book.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my gosh, that's too funny. Well, that wraps us up for this week.
Yeah, we did it. We got through it. We've got 2 more weeks in this book, right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's going pretty well. These last chunks, they were a little bit harder for me to get through and read. They're a little bit more dense and very specific. I feel like this week's reading is the kind that's way more like you pick it up before an appointment, or you're like doing a bit of research and making some notes before you go in to see your doctor, more so than like interesting reading. So I feel like that's why it was a little harder to get through it all. But a good resource, like one of those books that's probably really good to just like have on your shelf. And if you don't have the parts where you personally are going to go through perimenopause or menopause, people who are going to. There's a very good chance you're in some sort of relationship, whether that's a romantic or a familiar relationship with someone who is. You should know these things. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Tune in next week. We'll talk about the next few chapters and half of the toolkit. And in the meantime, happy homeschooling.
Have a great day.